Thank you, John. Good morning, everyone. As we gather together, we have a story where Jesus has just calmed the sea, and now he's crossed that calm sea and come into this land in the Gerasa is what it's called. It's about 30 miles from the Sea of Galilee, and it's definitely Gentile territory. It's the part that was away from where the Jews were comfortable. Jesus and his disciples are in this uncomfortable place. There are some clues and cues to all of that uncomfortableness that's seen in demon possession, that's seen in tombs, that's talked about with pigs. All of these unclean times and places must make the disciples very uncomfortable. It says in the book of Isaiah that people who sit among the graves and spend their nights keeping secret vigil, who eat the flesh of pigs and whose pots hold broth of impure meat, that these are the ones that rebel against God. There are some theologians that look at this story that I just read for you about Jesus and the demoniac, and they say that it's really a story that's retelling the story of the Exodus. You know how Moses led the people through the sea, across the safe sea, into a new land, a foreign land, and then how the unclean were drowned, like the pigs were drowned. It's a very interesting comparison, and that might be what it's about. But there are some other things about this story that are pretty interesting. There are other theologians who see this story as a social commentary on the Romans and their occupation of the land. For you see, as Jesus meets the man that has the legion inside of him, that name legion right away is a Roman term that talks about an army garrison of about 6,000 men. And so legion, right away they hear, just like those Romans, right? And then Jesus commands the unclean spirit out, almost like a military general makes a command, and they beg. And he calls the pigs calls them a herd of pigs. Pigs aren't in herds, but guess what? New recruits in the military, which are usually the rawest and the meanest, were called herds. The herd of new recruits. It's very interesting, the comparisons. Because here's the thing, around the time when the book of Mark was being written, in this area, there was I think it was the 10th legion of the Roman army was present. And can you believe, they always had a flag with their symbol that represented their group. Can you just guess what their symbol was? A boar's head. Pigs. Pretty interesting. The boy Jesus, the baby, the innocent child from that manger has grown up to be a political figure, someone who's very not afraid to confront the ills and the injustices of his day and time. But I see something else in this story for us today. One of those times where you kind of have to read between the lines, where when we read that story, we think about what it means for us today. And so, to me, the compassion of Jesus for this man, this unwell man, that's living in tombs, that's screaming and shouting, that's breaking chains off, that for heaven's sakes, his community tried to chain him up, that there's a message for us about compassion. Now, I don't really know where I stand on this whole demon possession thing, because I'm afraid that the minute that I say I really don't believe in demon possession, then something's going to come back and I'm going to be surprised. But I also think it's really unfair for us to try and say that mental illness is a demon possession, or schizophrenia is a demon possession. No, I don't want to go there. I don't think that's fair. And as far as I know in the Bible, this is the only story, really, of self-abuse that I've ever heard of, where the man is cutting himself with stones. We know stories today of people who do that. And I don't want to judge that illness as being demon-possessed. And here's the other thing. I believe we all have our own demons to deal with. I knew a man, let's call him Ted because I want to protect his identity. I knew a man named Ted. He was a small, gentle little man, and literally every time the church doors were open, Ted was there. He especially came whenever there was a potluck. And he would come and have his place in the pew. He knew where he sat. And he would come to every funeral that we ever had. And when he would come, I would go and sit with him because he would always be sitting at a table alone. And I would sit with Ted, and he would talk. And he would tell me the history of the person who had died or of the people that were sitting at the table next to us. He knew all of the family trees of everyone. And yet he had no family of his own. And every day that he would come to one of these potlucks, I would say, "Now, Ted, can I go fill a plate for you for supper tonight?" Because he lived alone, and he was elderly. "Well, Pastor, you don't have to do that." And I would get up and go and make a plate for Ted. It's kind of funny. The ladies, they would never do that. They would say, "We'll let you take care of that, Pastor." I don't know. One night, Ted stopped to get gas at the local gas station where everybody knew him. And there were 3 teenage boys in there, and they started calling him fag and all kinds of other horrible names. And the people in the store heard it all, but they all just kind of ignored it. Ted went home, and those 3 boys followed him, broke into his house, beat him up, and cut his throat. But Ted didn't die. He was able to get some help, but he was elderly, and so afterwards they wouldn't let him go back to his house. He had one of those homes where he'd put tinfoil up on all of the windows. It must have been sort of like a tomb. Ted ended up being taken to the local nursing home, where he lived out the rest of his days until he died a natural death. We all have demons. The demon of violence, as our second lesson reminded us, might be the worst demon. I don't believe homosexuality is a demon. I don't believe schizophrenia is a demon. But I do believe that in the midst of things we can't understand, in the midst of things that make us uncomfortable, that we can approach Jesus, the Son of the Most High God, and ask for help. And when you approach the Lord, how do you do that? Screaming, as the demon-possessed man in our story does? On your knees, as the shepherds? How do you approach Jesus? On one hand, it is my prayer that we approach the Lord with a clean heart, that we have done our best to stand up for justice, to defend those who have no one defending them. You know, Ted did have a family. The church was his family, but they weren't doing a very good job of it. On one hand, we restore relationships. We work hard to try to understand people. You know, when you get to know someone, you might realize that what looked like a demon to you was actually just something you didn't understand. And on the other hand, that you come to the Lord working on those things that you are so fearful of in your own hearts, and that you're willing to lay that out and give it to God Give it to Jesus, who knows the healing touch, who is not afraid to be with people that the rest of the world considered unclean. When the demoniac was healed and became in his right mind, as the story said, Jesus didn't let him go with him. He said, "Go home, make peace with your family and friends, and tell the world what the Lord has done for you." May we all know Jesus, that man that walks among us yet today, as the one that's healing our hearts, expanding our minds, and giving us courage to step up for all in need. Amen.